The knock came just as Margaret set the kettle on the stove. It wasn't the polite kind, the kind neighbors use. It was fast, urgent, almost angry. She froze, her hand still on the handle, her mind caught between disbelief and the faint hum of Christmas music still playing from the radio. 2 days ago, she had scrolled past the photos on Facebook, her daughter's house lit up like a magazine spread, every chair filled at the long dining table, smiles locked in gold light. Everyone. But her. Margaret hadn't been invited. Not even a phone call. She opened the door now to find Claire, her eldest, standing there in the cold, hair windblown, cheeks flushed. Her red coat was buttoned wrong, and in her hands she clutched a crumpled envelope. "Mom," she said, forcing a tremor into her voice. "I need to come in." Margaret stepped aside, the scent of Claire's perfume mingling with winter air. Inside, Claire didn't bother with pleasantries. She placed the envelope on the kitchen table between them. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't urgent," she began, sitting down like she owned the place. Margaret sat opposite her, fingers wrapped around her mug though it was still empty. The paper in that envelope was thick, official. Margaret didn't touch it. Claire leaned forward. "I made a mistake, Mom. A big one. And if you don't help me, I could lose everything. I know we've had our differences, but you're still my mother." Her eyes shimmered, but the smile that followed was the same one she used when bargaining for a bigger allowance at 16. Margaret thought of last Christmas, how Claire had told relatives she was too controlling, how she'd moved family gatherings without telling her. And now, this. The kettle began to whistle. Margaret didn't move to turn it off. Instead, she looked at her daughter and said, quietly, "Tell me what you've done." The wind rattled the window, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to chime. Claire didn't answer right away. She took her time, peeling off her gloves, laying them neatly on the table as though rehearsing the words in her head. Finally, she slid the envelope toward Margaret. Inside was a notice from the bank, past due on a loan Margaret had never heard about. The amount was staggering. A signature, Margaret's own, sat neatly at the bottom of the guarantor line. Her stomach dropped. "That's not mine." Claire's eyes flickered, just for a moment. "It doesn't matter whose it is. They'll say it is. And if I don't pay them back, they'll come after your house. I didn't know it would get this bad." She paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "You have the money, Mom. You can make this go away." Margaret's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "You forged my name?" Claire didn't flinch. Instead, she reached across, resting her hand over Margaret's as if to soothe her. "It's not about blame right now, it's about saving the family. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't desperate." From the doorway, Margaret's husband, Robert, appeared, his face pale. "What's going on?" His voice was careful, the way it always was when the girls came home with trouble. Claire turned to him with practiced vulnerability. "Dad, please. It's just a loan gone wrong. I didn't want to worry you. But now, if Mom doesn't help, the bank will take everything." Robert's jaw tightened. "We're not talking about help, Claire. We're talking about a crime." Claire's lips trembled. "You'd let your own daughter go to jail? At Christmas?" Margaret felt the room closing in, the heat from the kettle now suffocating. She glanced at Robert, his eyes pleading for her to stay firm, but guilt clawed at her ribs. The clock ticked loudly between them, each second a question she didn't want to answer. And for the first time, Margaret wasn't sure whose side she was on. 2 mornings later, a plain brown box appeared on the front porch. No return address. No postage. Just her name, written in thick black marker. Margaret stood in the doorway, the cold biting at her ankles through her slippers. She brought the box inside, setting it on the kitchen counter. Robert joined her, his hair still damp from the shower, steam curling from his coffee mug. "Who's it from?" She shook her head. "No idea." The cardboard was soft in spots, like it had been left in damp air too long. She cut the tape carefully with the paring knife. Inside, beneath a layer of crumpled newspaper, was a stack of photocopies, her own signature, over and over again, on documents she had never seen. Property transfer forms. Credit applications. A handwritten note on top read, "Now you understand. Help me, or this goes public." Robert swore under his breath, pulling the papers toward him. "This isn't just a loan, Margaret. She's been planning this for months. Maybe longer." Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for the note again, scanning the familiar loops and curves of Claire's handwriting. She thought about the last Christmas they'd all been together, how Claire had stood by the fireplace, telling stories with that same easy smile, her arm draped around an aunt who adored her. No one had seen the edge beneath it. Robert's voice cut through her thoughts. "We need to take this to someone, police, lawyer, doesn't matter. She's crossed a line." The phone rang then, sharp and sudden. Margaret answered on instinct. Claire's voice spilled through the receiver, calm but edged. Did you get my package? We don't have to make this ugly, Mom. But time's running out. Margaret's gaze drifted to the window, where the snow had begun to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. Her daughter's voice in her ear was steady, certain, like she already knew the answer. And for the first time, Margaret felt the frost creeping in from the inside, not the cold outside. That night, the house was quiet except for the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp, casting a circle of warm light over the scattered papers. Robert was across from her, elbows on the table, fingers pressed together like a man in prayer. Between them lay a photograph she hadn't seen in years, Claire at 7, wearing a crooked paper crown from a Christmas cracker, her face smeared with chocolate cake. Margaret remembered the way Claire had crawled into her lap that night, whispering how she wanted Christmas to last forever. I keep thinking, Margaret said softly, maybe if I'd been different, softer, or more patient, she wouldn't have turned into someone who could do this. Robert's gaze was steady. Margaret, this isn't about what you did or didn't do. You gave her every chance. We both did. She brushed her thumb over the glossy corner of the photo. She's still my child, Rob. No matter what she's done. And you're still a person, he replied. A person who deserves to be safe in her own home, not blackmailed by her own blood. Margaret looked at him then, really looked at the lines around his eyes, the weariness in his shoulders. He'd stood by her through every storm, even the ones her children had caused. The kettle clicked off in the background, its steam fading into the stillness. Her hands tightened on the photograph before she set it down. I can't keep rescuing her, she whispered. The words trembled but didn't break. Robert reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Then don't. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hopeless. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the yard in a clean, unbroken sheet. For the first time in years, Margaret felt she could breathe without waiting for the next demand to come crashing through her door. 2 days later, Margaret sat in her lawyer's office, the faint scent of old leather and pine from a small Christmas wreath in the corner. The papers lay neatly in a folder between her and the attorney, every forged signature, every threatening note. Robert sat beside her, his hand resting on her knee under the desk, a quiet anchor. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, flipping through the evidence. We can file immediately. This will freeze any attempt to touch your property or assets. It will also make it clear that you're not liable for her debts. Margaret nodded slowly. And the criminal part? That's your choice, the lawyer said. We can press charges, or not. But the legal protection comes first. Her fingers lingered on the pen before signing. Each stroke felt like carving something permanent into stone, not just on paper, but into her own life. That evening, back home, the front porch light glowed against the snow. Margaret set the signed documents on the counter, next to a small pot of stew Robert had left simmering. She poured 2 mugs of coffee, and for the first time in weeks, they ate in easy silence. At 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, Margaret could see Claire's shadow, still, waiting. The knocking came, softer than before. Margaret didn't move. She stood in the kitchen, coffee warm in her hands, the paperwork safely sealed in the lawyer's envelope. The sound of the knocking faded into the hum of the refrigerator, into the soft creak of the house. She turned to Robert, who was watching her with quiet understanding. I'm done, Rob. Outside, the shadow shifted, then disappeared into the night. Margaret exhaled, the air leaving her chest slow and steady. The snow kept falling, covering the path to her door, layer by layer, until it was as if no one had ever come knocking at all.